If you've spent any time at all in online fan communities lately, you've probably stumbled into a pretty fiery debate about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Today, we're going to unpack one of the most widespread critiques out there, a perspective that's so big it's even got its own name.
So let's just get right into it. You may have seen this term floating around online, and it's really at the heart of a massive conversation about where the MCU is going. What does it actually mean, and what is the argument that's being made here?
All right, first things first. Before we can get into the weeds of this whole thing, we've got to understand where that name even comes from. See, it's not just a clever play on words, it's really a shorthand for an entire theory about a fundamental shift in Marvel's thinking.
And there it is. The term MCU is basically the entire thesis statement for this group of critics. Their core belief is that Marvel has deliberately pivoted away from the kind of storytelling that built the franchise into a juggernaut, and instead they've adopted a more female-focused approach that, in their view, is pushing away the original fan base.
Now, here's something the people who make this argument are always quick to clarify. They say their issue is not with strong female characters. In fact, they'll often praise legacy heroes like Black Widow or Scarlet Witch. The critique, as they frame it, is really aimed at what they see as a newer, more politically driven way of creating these characters.
So, a huge piece of the puzzle here, according to these critics, is the marketing. Let's take a look at how they compare the promotional campaigns for two very different movies from two totally different eras of the MCU. This right here is absolutely central to the MCU argument. On the one hand, you have the 2008 marketing for Iron Man. These critics will tell you it was all about Tony Stark, his genius, his journey, his story. The whole point was to get you invested in the character. But then, they'll point to the Marvels and argue that its promotion was all about external ideas, female empowerment, representation, which to them felt like putting a social message before the story itself. Okay, so this leads to the really big question at the core of this whole critique. What was the result of this supposed change in strategy? What kind of impact, they ask, did this new focus have on the very people who made the MCU a global phenomenon in the first place?
And this quote really cuts right to the heart of the alienation argument. The idea here is that when you market something specifically to one group, you are, whether you mean to or not, telling another group that it's not for them. The claim is that the traditional, largely male audience felt like they were being told, hey, this one isn't for you, creating a divide where never existed before.
This is where the argument draws a very sharp line in the sand. On one side, you have what critics call natural diversity, where characters from different backgrounds feel like they belong in the story and serve the plot. They contrast this with what they label political diversity, where they feel the main purpose of the story is just to showcase those characters, making it feel less like organic storytelling and more like ticking boxes off a list. All right, let's shift gears from marketing and talk about the heroes themselves, because this is where the critique gets really specific, focusing on a pattern that gets called replacement, and this whole idea of passing the torch from the old guard to the new. This is probably one of the biggest pieces of evidence that critics point to. You can see the pattern they're highlighting here. A beloved, established male hero is systematically followed by a new female counterpart. Iron Man to Ironheart, Hulk to She-Hulk, you get the idea. The argument isn't just that it's happening, but that it feels like a very deliberate, almost formulaic process.
And the complaints about these new heroes go even deeper. The argument is that they often feel underdeveloped, like their skills and powers just appear out of nowhere without any real struggle. A really common complaint you'll hear is that they're often shown to be instantly better than their male predecessors, which critics feel skips over the character development that made us love the original heroes in the first place.
Okay, if there was one scene that became the poster child for this entire debate, it might be this one from the She-Hulk show. In it, Jennifer Walters tells her cousin, Bruce Banner, the original Hulk, that she's just naturally better at controlling her anger because she has to deal with things like catcalling and mansplaining every day. For critics, this moment felt like it completely trivialized Bruce's decades of trauma and suffering, basically using him as a prop to make the new hero look better.
You know, this critique doesn't just stop with the good guys. Proponents of this view argue that this exact same lens is being applied to female villains, and they say it's making them way less compelling as a result.
Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, is almost always the prime example here. Here you have a character with almost unlimited power and a really tragic backstory, all the ingredients for a top-tier villain, right? But critics argue her big turn to evil was completely weakened by blaming it all on an outside force, the corrupting magic of the Darkhold book, instead of her own grief and her own choices.
And this really boils it all down. The core critique here is that female villains are almost never allowed to just be evil because they choose to be. Instead, their actions are explained away as the result of something else, magic, trauma, you name it. This, critics claim, robs them of their own agency and that complex internal struggle that made villains like Thanos or Killmonger so unforgettable. They're not true villains. They're victims who do bad things.
Now, according to this point of view, all of these creative choices aren't just a debate for fan forums. They've had a very real-world consequence. You hear a lot of talk about general superhero fatigue, but proponents of the MCU theory argue it's not that simple. They say it's a direct result of the choices we've just been talking about. The bottom line? People aren't showing up like they used to.
And as their proof, critics point straight to the box office. Back in the early phases, hitting $1 billion was almost a given for a big MCU movie. But now, well, a lot of recent films are struggling just to get past the 500 million mark. For those who believe in the MCU theory, this drop isn't a coincidence. It's the totally predictable result of alienating your core audience.
So to wrap it all up, the MCU viewpoint is really an argument about cause and effect. The central claim is that Marvel ditched its proven, character-driven formula to go after a new, more progressive audience. And the ultimate irony, according to this critique, is that the strategy just didn't work. It didn't bring in the new audience in big enough numbers, and it pushed away the loyal fans who built the MCU in the first place.
And that leaves us with a final, much bigger question, doesn't it? No matter what you think about this particular debate, it really touches on a huge challenge for modern entertainment. As these massive, beloved franchises try to evolve and change with the times, how do they navigate that change? How do they decide who comes along for the ride and who might just get left behind?